Hello, everybody. My name is Liz Harrington, and I am a dating and business coach. And I want to share with you all today the story of my very first 5K month. And I really aim to be super transparent with all of you because something that's really frustrated me in the coaching industry is the lack of transparency and a lot of the false income claims that I 100% think are happening. And so, I want to be totally real and raw with all of you about one, like what it actually took to get to that first 5K month. And then also how long it took me and like what my position actually was in order to get there. And so I'll start off by saying that I have been in the online coaching space since 2020, and things have definitely changed significantly since that time. I launched a intuitive eating and health coaching business in September of 2020, and it took off pretty quickly in the sense that I was getting a lot of engagement on my Instagram posts. I was able to book clients fairly quickly with, I would say, minimal effort. Like I was posting things like 3 tips to get in more protein or like healthy carb swaps. And I was getting clients simply from that. And the truth of the matter is that back in 2020, coaching was a lot less saturated. There was also a lot more consumer trust in coaching. And so it was, frankly, I think, much easier to sign clients with less business skills. Now, I didn't make more than a couple of $1,000s per month. I was charging way, way, way less at the time. And I also had a full-time job on the side too. So I wasn't like super invested necessarily in growing the account and growing my business. Now, the second business that I started was in September of 2022. I paired hypnosis and attachment styles together, and I launched a new business in the dating and relationship niche. There was immediate interest in that business, and I booked quite a few clients right away. Although similar to the health coaching space, I was very inconsistent with posting. I would take many, many months off at a time, and I wasn't necessarily really leveraging things like Reels. Like I wasn't really strategic in my social media approach. And so I made even less money overall in that first leg of my dating business. Now, in January of 2024, I finally decided I really, really want to go all in on this business. I want this to be the year that I finally quit my corporate job and I want to make some real sustainable income here. And so I decided to really commit to social media. At the time, I had about 800-ish followers, but most of them were friends and family. I had probably, I would say, maybe maybe 50 of them were strangers. People that had followed me over the years for other things, but most of the people were in my network. So I definitely didn't have much of an audience. And so at that time, yeah, I started posting just 3 times a week. I posted reels, including the cringy ones of me doing things like this. And I wasn't dancing or anything, but I definitely was really on the edge of my comfort zone with how much of my face was being shown. Typically in the past, I was only posting static photos and maybe like nature reels for videos. And so I really stretched myself to be able to put myself out there more. And fairly quickly, within the first 6 weeks, I ended up going viral. And so that first viral reel ended up hitting over 3 million views and brought in about 2,500 new audience members, which may actually seem low compared to hitting 3.1 million. And that is true. So even if you go viral, it's not like suddenly you're going to have 100,000 people, but it should bring in, a couple thousand at least. And so a couple months after that, I think actually it was about 6 weeks after that, I decided to quit my corporate job. I had been getting quite a bit of traction on Instagram, although I just simply didn't have the space to really put out any actual offers to work with clients because I was really so overwhelmed with my corporate job, plus trying to grow this Instagram account on the side. I'm a highly sensitive person, and so I need a lot of space and I don't do well under a lot of pressure and stress and busyness. So I quit my corporate job, and that's when I was really able to go all in and focus on strategy. I hired a mentor and I started working closely with her. So that was April of 2024. At that point, I had gone semi-viral a couple more times, not a million, but a little bit less than a million, around like 800, 900,000 views on certain posts. And so I was up to around 5,000 followers by that point. So it was a pretty healthy audience that was decently engaged. I mean, I wouldn't say that I had more than 200 people watching my stories or anything, but I had enough people that like I definitely had the opportunity to really start selling and getting clients. Now, that very first month that I quit my corporate job, which was April, I think I probably only booked like 2 sessions. I think I probably just booked a couple $100 worth of revenue in that month. And in May, things still weren't really going anywhere. May, I think that I made around $500 to $600. It was still very low. And so at that point, I was really selling. I had an offer. It was called Breaking Free from Attachment, and it was a 4 session package for $899. And I was selling the hell out of it, or so I thought. And I was getting a lot of engagement on my posts, hundreds of likes and saves and all of that. I was getting a lot of DMs from people saying, like, your content is really speaking to me, asking me questions. They were interested in my offers, but nobody was biting. I had actually one client at the time, but she wasn't even on that actual long-term container, long-term meaning just the 2-month container. She was still doing a session by session approach. So I was starting to get frustrated because I felt like, what am I doing wrong here? I don't understand why I'm getting all this engagement, but I'm not actually getting any true traction. So the next month, June of 2024, I hit 5K. So it went literally from $650 or something to a 5K month. And that was the first 5K month that I'd ever hit in the history of my online coaching experience. And so I want to share with you all today exactly what I did in that time frame that allowed me to finally get to that elusive 5K mark. Number one was that I had a business idea that had a competitive edge. Now, I shared with you already what my business was. It was hypnosis and attachment work together. That was very unheard of at the time. This idea of subconscious reprogramming was just starting to kind of become a little bit more mainstream. But in fact, when I'd really introduced this concept back in 2022, I hadn't seen anybody else that was offering anything like that. There were certainly attachment coaches and there were some hypnotherapists around for sure, but there wasn't anybody combining the two. And so, because I had this differentiator of using hypnosis and subconscious reprogramming to solve a problem, which was anxious attachment, that a lot of people had, there was a lot of interest, right? Because people had tried things like therapy, just trying to meditate through it, take some deep breaths, talk themselves out of panicking over an unanswered text, and they weren't getting anywhere. And so, because I had this unique angle, that really allowed me to stand out amongst my competition that were um, promoting different approaches to solving attachment issues. Now, beyond this, that combination of hypnosis and attachment was very much a representation of who I was at the time, what I was really interested, passionate about, and what personally I was going through. So I was still single at the time. I was still working through some of my own attachment issues. I was definitely not fully on the other side of the journey, but I had been a hypnotherapist for about 2 years at that point, and I had seen the power of hypnotherapy. And so I was extremely passionate about it. I loved it so much. I believed in it very, very deeply. And because of that combination of really my passions, interests, and my gifts and my skill sets, I had this really unique combination that really reflected my greatest abilities as a practitioner, and they were also a market fit. And so that sector of women who had anxious attachment, it's a pretty large market sector. There's a lot of women that relate to that idea of panicking over an unanswered text. And it's something too in the relationship space that has blown up, right? Attachment styles have really come into the mainstream quite a bit after that book Attached came out, if any of you are familiar with that. So with all of that said, I had a really, really good business idea. And what I would really invite you to consider is if you actually have a good business idea. So the reason why some business ideas are not so good and mistakes that I see other women and coaches making is that not all business ideas actually necessarily have that same differentiator and competitive edge. And so, for example, when I was doing health coaching and just intuitive eating, I mean, Intuitive eating is like a little bit of a differentiator, but it's also extremely common. There are so many intuitive eating coaches out there. So there is a high level of competition. And I didn't really have a new approach to intuitive eating. I was just kind of using a lot of the tactics that I had learned myself through. There's a book called Intuitive Eating that a lot of people have read and use those same approaches. And so there wasn't really anything there. I didn't really have a competitive edge in that space. And I see a lot of other people too that have these broader businesses. Like, yeah, I'm a weight loss coach. I am a business coach. I'm a relationship coach. And there isn't really anything special or unique about the way that they're going about solving that problem. So I really want you to think, what is my unique differentiator or my unique approach that I have that makes me different than other coaches, that makes me stand out, that makes somebody say, huh, that's interesting. I've never tried that before. I'd be interested to try it. And I mean, this doesn't have to be like crazy, like nobody's ever heard of it before, but I really want you to think about what is really different and unique about my approach and how can I really speak to the power of that and not necessarily hate on anybody else's approach, but talk about why other approaches don't work. So for me, I talked a lot about why talk therapy isn't effective for anxious attachment. So what are the other approaches that your potential clients are trying and why is your approach more effective than what they're trying to do themselves? An example that I think a lot of people have been interested in lately is like nervous system regulation for finances and money. So, not just the traditional ways of making money, but actually being able to rewire your nervous system to hold more money, to feel more safety around money. That's been kind of like a unique angle for finances that I've seen started to take off recently. The other thing is I want you to really think about the actual sector of clients that you're targeting and thinking about their buying behaviors, thinking about the urgency they have around solving this problem, how much they typically invest in personal development. Are they people that take a lot of time to consider whether something is right for them, or are they somebody who's willing to experiment and willing to just try something right away? Ultimately, what I've discovered is that the level of urgency, motivation, or for a lack of a better word, desperation that somebody has to solve their problem, the more likely they are to actually pull the trigger and spend the money, no matter how much it costs. Now, people that maybe feel less urgency around their problem or feel like, I can probably solve this myself, are going to be a harder market to sell to. So I'll share personally that I did end up pivoting into a more general dating space from anxious attachment because I no longer really want to work with attachment anymore. And general dating was so much harder to sell, even with the competitive edge around hypnosis. And there's a couple of reasons for that, but I would say one of the big ones is that dating is often not something people feel like they need professional support in. There's a lot of external excuses that people can use, right? Like, oh, there's so many unavailable men out there, like the dating market's just bad, like Hinge sucks recently. They're not typically thinking that there's a problem with them, but rather a problem with their external circumstances. There's also a lot of ego in dating, which makes it hard to seek out support for it. You feel like you should naturally be good at dating, unlike something that's more of a true skill, like learning to play guitar or even building a business. You probably don't have as much ego around thinking that you naturally would have that skill set. So I want you to just get super curious about this target market and really ask yourself, like, why would they buy this product or service? And why wouldn't they buy this product or service? Why do they think that they don't need it? And look, there's never going to be a perfect business model, a perfect business idea, but I really just want you to start thinking strategically rather than investing a lot of your time and energy in a business that's actually just doesn't really have the potential to really be scalable or be profitable long term. Okay, so number two way that I hit my 5K month, what changed was that I built a brand from my essence rather than what I thought people wanted. So I am very anti-traditional branding strategy or techniques where typically you will be asked questions like, how do you want your audience to feel? What colors represent that? What fonts represent that? And starting from this space of trying to curate the way that you show up as a coach or practitioner, rather than actually starting from within yourself and recognizing your unique essence, your innate way of being, and allowing that to actually be the brand, and then allowing that innate essence to attract the right people who are a match for who you are, who your brand is. So for me, because I started the more traditional way and I was in the dating and relationship space, I was thinking, okay, I want this brand to feel really open and loving and receptive and nourishing and empathetic. So it had like this very kind of sweet, loving tone to it. And I had light pink and white were my two colors. I would make little reels that were like, huh, like they were very cute and sweet. And I would always be smiling and like, oh, I love you guys so much. And I'm gonna be honest, like that's actually not really my essence. Maybe you can tell from this video, I'm from Boston originally. I definitely have like a little bit of that East Coast edge. Not to say that I'm not an empathetic person, but I would say generally like my style is I actually really enjoy being direct and clear. Of course, in a way that's also extremely kind, but I'm not like fully just like that healer archetype, like that loving archetype. And so when I was trying to imitate that brand, it felt very much like I had to put on this act, if you will. And it was really exhausting, honestly. And it also didn't land because I think that we don't give people or our audience enough credit for how intuitive they really are and how they can spot when something doesn't feel quite right, quite real, quite authentic, quite aligned. And ultimately, when you are a personal brand and you are a solopreneur, and so you are the sole representation of your brand, you really do want your brand to be an extension of you. The brand is you. So you don't want to try to be somebody else just to make the brand work, right? That works better if you are really like, let's say you're selling like Ritual Vitamins I have here. If you are the brand for Ritual Vitamins, that's not a personal brand, right? So then you might want to ask those questions of how you want your audience to feel and all of that. But that is not the strategy that I believe works for personal brands, for coaches, practitioners who are operating again as solopreneurs. So what I ended up doing was saying, well, actually, luckily I had a mentor who kind of called me out for this. And she was like, I don't really feel like you are being fully reflected in your brand. I feel like you have this much more like powerful, bold, direct energy that's not coming out at all. And it's also impacting your authority, right? Because people do want to buy from people that they see as authorities, that they see as somebody who they trust, and that's somebody who they respect and want to emulate, not from just like, some sweet girl that is doing like hearts in her reels. I'm like cringing thinking about that. So I decided to try on a new archetype, which really was more of a integrated representation of who I was, which was much more, much more integrated in the sense that like I became much more direct, much bolder, much more playful, much more East Coast, and much more honest in my content, integrated with the side of me that was still very empathetic and kind and non-judgmental and all of those things. And to help do that, actually, I literally would wear different clothes. Like I started to wear larger hoop earrings. I would wear heels. Even if you couldn't see my heels when I was filming, I would wear them. I changed the expression on my face to better represent who I truly was as a person, which was, yeah, a little bit, I don't know, I'd have like a smirk on my face often, which again feels more like me than just like this girl who's like, and if you look at my Instagram account, you can literally see when I transitioned to being more integrated and more honest with who I was. That was again in like June. So it was at the exact time when my brand started to, when I started to get more sales. And yes, it worked. Like I had so many more inquiries when I started to be more direct. In fact, there was another post that didn't probably hit around 500K or so, which was around like it was like 5 boundaries that you let men cross when you're anxiously attached. And I just had like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It was very direct, very simplistic, very honest, straight to the point. that post blew up in terms of I got a lot of inquiries from that post alone because I was truly just being myself and I was being honest and it landed. So for you, I want you to really ask, what are my innate energies? What are the energies that I naturally give off as a person? And what are some of my conflicting sides that I have? And so it really helps to think about like masculine and feminine sides too, and how you can actually integrate those together, because that's really what makes you unique and stand out, right? Like I imagine all of you, even if you are a super, super sweet person, I bet there's another side to you. And when you bring that other side into your brand, that's when it becomes really interesting, really authentic, and really unique. So rather than asking, what does my audience want? How do I want them to feel? I want you to ask yourself, how do I naturally make people feel? And if you struggle to answer that question, ask some of your friends, like ask your partner, ask your family, what are the energies that you get from me being around me? What do you feel like is my essence? And once you have a list of maybe, I would say like 5 or 10 adjectives that really are, again, comprehensive to who you are as a person, not just to the brand that you're trying to create, but who you really are. And again, I really, really want to encourage you to try to get those conflicting sides, those pieces that seem contradicting. And then I would invite you to plug that into ChatGPT and ask ChatGPT, what are the best what are the best fonts for this brand, what are the best colors for this brand, if this is my innate essence. And then you can kind of go from there. I actually really recommend choosing colors that you also feel like you look really good in. So if you're familiar with your seasonal color palette, I'm a fall, but if you know what that is, it can be really helpful to create a brand with colors that you actually uniquely look good in and hopefully are already a part of your wardrobe. But yeah, ChatGPT can be a great resource once you have those adjectives to help you to find those like perfect colors, those perfect fonts, and then create a Pinterest board with that, so you have some visuals and imageries too to use in your stories, in your posts, all of that, and you can tweak it as needed. But my brand right now for my business coaching account is very much like this like charcoal, ivory, dusty rose, teal, a little bit of burgundy and gold. And like I love those colors, first of all. They feel very me. And they really represent the brand that I'm trying to create, which is kind of, yeah, this mix of being bold and intuitive, direct, and gentle and soft and playful and structured. Like there's a lot of different pieces that are all kind of coming together that feel very much like me and who I am. So number 3 way that I hit my first 5K months was really specifically seeing my audience and knowing exactly who I was talking to, speaking her exact language, her exact specific problems in a way where she felt so seen. So I believe that when you have an offer, that is when you need to get really niche. You yourself, you don't have to be super niche. Like it's actually okay to be a dating coach, but when it comes to an offer, you want the offer to speak to one specific person. And so when I was doing the attachment business work, my client was obviously someone who was anxiously attached. And so what I was doing was not just speaking to someone who's anxiously attached, but like even way, way deeper than that. And I had a post that actually blew up, which was 4 anxious attacher archetypes. So I had 4 different versions of what anxious attachment looked like, because it's actually, anxious attachment is actually quite broad. But when you get really specific and look at all the different versions of the way that anxious attachment can be expressed, you'll see, yeah, there's lots of different ways that that broader customer who like seems specific, but it's actually not specific enough really shows up. So panicking over a unanswered text is good, but like I would love for you to go even deeper and be able to show like, okay, there's a version of the anxious attacher who is a doormat. There's also a version of the anxious attacher who is explosive. There's a version of the anxious attacher who's really in her head and actually has intimacy issues that she's not even aware of, but just overanalyzes emojis and texts and is thinking about why he stopped calling me babe and why he didn't put an exclamation point there, right? Like really, really, really specific. And so creating these customer archetypes for me was crazy helpful because then I was able to create posts that really addressed each one of these archetypes and allowed me to get so specific. The truth of the matter is that there is so much content on Instagram right now that if you really want your content to stand out, it needs to speak to somebody so much so that they are like, you are in my head, you are speaking my inner dialogue, you are somehow aware of the things that keep me up at night, my internal conflicts, my internal tension points, the things that I haven't even told anybody that I didn't know anybody else experienced before. That is how specific you want to get. And so I would highly encourage you to also create your own customer archetypes. So let's say, for example, I'll give you another example, my business coaching niche. I am generally going after the sensitive entrepreneur, the healers, the guides, the deeper coaches. That's like my broad kind of ideal client. There are so many different versions of that client. And so I've created 4 customer archetypes for that client specifically. The mama, she's the overgiver. She doesn't charge her value. She's often going overtime in sessions, so worried about her clients and taking too much responsibility for them. The peacekeeper, who's terrified of rocking the boat, struggles to post polarizing, bold content, has a lot of imposter syndrome, worried about trolls. Then there is the intellect, the one who is too smart for her own good, who uses too much jargon, very much in her head, over analyzing things, and struggles with real intimacy with her audience. And then 4, the complex one, who has so many ideas, she's bouncing around like crazy, can't really commit to a direction, often stays very vague and high level, and often feels like she is or she's afraid of getting boxed in. So those are my 4 customer archetypes for that broader niche. And so that's made it so helpful for me to create content that makes my audience members feel very seen. For you, think about, who is that broad ideal client? Maybe it's mothers, maybe it's women in the corporate world, maybe it is healers, maybe it is male leaders, whoever it is. And then really put that person into your field of awareness. And I want you to just start noticing all of the different things, all of the different ways that that person shows up. So this is really about being a very astute observer and to start noticing literally the things that your ideal client is saying, that your ideal client is struggling with, because I guarantee you that you have people in your life that are this ideal client, whether they are actual clients already or they're like friends and colleagues and family members. Start becoming obsessed with learning about this type of client, and just start noticing the different versions of this client, the different ways that they express, and start to create those different archetypes of how they come out. This activity does take a little bit of time because this is really, to me, a form of market research that, initially might be challenging for you to think about all of these like very specific details. But as you just start to tune into this person, to again allow this person to be in your field of awareness, I guarantee you that you're probably a version of this client too. Start to take note of all of those things. Start to take note of their behavioral patterns, their emotions, again, the things that keep them up at night, their internal conflicts, their tensions, their subconscious beliefs, the self-sabotaging behaviors that they have, their fears, their goals, their desires, all of those things. And when you can really put a name to them too, like I find it really fun to like call someone the mama, the peacekeeper, all of those things, that helps you to really paint the picture of who they are so that you have that really vivid image of the person in your head when you create content for them. Okay, number 4 was exposing my truth through storytelling. So this one was really challenging for me, but I would say it made a really big impact on my client inquiries, my followers, and the closeness that my audience felt to me. And the truth of the matter is that, especially as AI starts to really take over, the coaches and practitioners that really are going to stand out are the ones that are the most human. So, not the ones that are super perfect and are all pulled together and have everything figured out, but the ones that are actually real and raw and true about their journey and where they're at and where they're still struggling and how they're handling it. And for me, that was frankly really hard, because I was single at the time that I launched this business, and I had a lot of fear around not being good enough to be a coach. Nobody would trust me or believe me if they knew I was single. I felt like a fraud. I felt like, why would anybody hire somebody who didn't have the full result? And so I was very reticent to put out anything about my personal dating life, to talk about what I was actually going through. I talked a little bit about my own anxious attachment struggles, but I hadn't talked about where I actually was in the dating space. And I felt like I was like energetically holding a lot back. Like it was starting to feel really heavy on my system, actually. And so finally, I decided, okay, like I'm going to reveal this part of myself. And I put out a reel that was why I am 31 and single. And it was like a photo of me in like a really beautiful outfit, like twirling around. And I was actually surprised. Like it got a lot of really positive feedback and engagement. There were also a lot of mean comments, mainly from men, actually, very few from women. There was a couple from women, but I felt like a huge weight roll off of me after I put out that reel. And I got a lot of new followers from it. I mean, hundreds of new followers, and I got client inquiries from it too. And although nobody said it to me directly, I just had this sense that revealing that allowed my audience to feel closer with me. And even though I didn't have the full outcome, I had a perspective that they didn't have. I was navigating it in a way that was a higher level of consciousness. And I consider something like this more of like horizontal leadership, where you are walking aside your clients and your audience. You're not way, way ahead. You are basically next to them, maybe a couple of steps ahead. And that is incredibly valuable, right? Because my perspective of somebody who is single and still swiping on Hinge and navigating the modern dating scene was so much different than somebody who had been married for 10 years and had never even been on Hinge before, right? And so I think, interestingly enough, I didn't feel that anybody thought that I was less credible because I didn't have the full result. I think people actually felt like I was more credible. And I know my clients appreciated too, being able to ask me about what was on my dating profile, like what was I experiencing when I was swiping on Hinge, rather than having to speak from it from a place of like, oh yeah, I'm like so beyond that. I've already done that, whatever. Now, I know this can be really raw and vulnerable for those of you who know that you're still mid-journey, to share that, to share what you're still going through and going through your struggles. But I can guarantee you that that is actually a competitive edge. It's actually a unique differentiator to still be in process and to be able to walk beside your clients in the journey. It is incredibly valuable, and it also is what makes you human. It's what allows your clients to feel permission to also be imperfect, to also be vulnerable, to also be raw and honest when you are leading the way and you are showing the way that you are navigating something versus sharing from the past. Now, of course, there is a difference between, I like to call it, there's sharing the wound, sharing the scab, and sharing the scar. And so sharing the wound would be like you are not able to um, have any real perspective about a situation. You're still very activated by it. You're kind of trauma dumping, crying, very emotional. If you are in that space in your transformation, even if it's like one part of your transformation, I would recommend not sharing it. To me, that is lack of authority, and that is more so you're just positioning yourself as like a friend and maybe someone who's kind of entertaining to watch, but not somebody who people are actually going to buy from. When you share the scar, you're sharing truly from the past. And so, I've been in a relationship now for about 8 or 9 months. And so when I now share from a dating perspective, I'm very much sharing from the past because I'm no longer on the dating journey. When you're sharing from the scab, it means that you're sharing mid-journey. And so again, that's what can be super interesting and valuable. For me, I am mid-journey in my business journey. So yes, like I have hit 5K months. I have not hit 10K months yet. I am not creating sustainable, consistent income in that way where I feel super comfortable. So I'm being honest, right? Like I am still struggling to figure out how can I get to that 10K a month mark where I feel like that's truly would basically be replacing most of my corporate income, a good amount of it at least. I'm still not at that point yet. And so when I'm sharing from a place of, okay, I haven't replaced my corporate salary yet, but I have been able to sign long-term clients, retain clients, sell digital products. Again, got to my first 5K month in June of 2024. I am still mid-process. And I suppose if you're in the business entrepreneurial journey, then you are maybe always considering yourself mid-process, but I don't know. Taking advice from somebody who has a million dollar business or started in like 2010 and has a $1 million business feels very different than talking to somebody who's really started their business in 2020, 2025, and yeah, is still working on those 5 to 10K months and understands the challenges and the struggles of building up an audience from scratch and not having an audience that is fully bought into them yet. And so that's personally where I see my value is actually that I'm kind of in the trenches with my audience from a business perspective. I would say that I'm ahead of them, right? Because I've likely generated more income than they have. I've likely, a lot of them are very much like new, like really not making much money, if any at all. So I am steps ahead of them, but I am not somebody who fully has the outcome of my business yet. And that feels vulnerable. It does. And it does, of course. I'm like, gosh, like I hope people still find me credible, even if I don't have a six-figure business yet. And maybe some people won't find me credible. And that's up to them, right? But I really believe that if you are even one or two steps ahead of your audience, you are offering a huge value. And by being transparent about where you're really at, you are offering a huge value. So that's that. Okay. The last thing that I did to get to my first 5K month was creating content that was activating. I would argue this actually may be the most important, or I'd say the step that really moved the needle the most for me in the most tangible way. So I mentioned that before I was, just hitting $650 a month or so. I was getting a lot of engagement, but I wasn't getting conversion. Um, and I was really confused, right? Because of all the engagement, I just figured that would translate to dollars. And the truth of the matter was that I was really good at creating educational content that was very shareable and savable. I offered a lot of tips, a lot of detail, a lot of value. But value does not equate to sales. They are almost, I would say, two different strategies. And frankly, now I'm actually struggling to go back to create value-based educational content because I'm so used to actually creating more sales content. Because once you do have a decent audience, and I would say, honestly, if you have an audience over 1,000, but even less, if you have an audience over like 500 and most of them are legitimate customers, you can absolutely start pivoting to like mostly sales content. Um, and the difference between sales content and educational content is that sales content is activating people to actually move and to purchase. And so there are three types of activating sales content: emotionally resonant content, authority content, and gap positioning content. Now, emotionally resonant content is basically that content where people feel like, oh my God, this is so specific. I feel so seen by this person. They are literally in my head. Um, Authority content is positioning yourself as the expert. And so it's being a leader, it's showing direction, it's showing the exact solution to the problem in a way that's very convicted. And it's also showing your results and your clients. So testimonials are really good here, little micro embodiment stories, sharing your broader story of how you went from X to Y is really powerful. And then gap positioning content, which is basically showing the specific problem that your ideal client has, what they've maybe tried to solve the problem, and then what the gap is between getting from their problem to the transformation. And whatever that gap is, that is your solution. So it's essentially what they're missing. So for me, I essentially illuminated that gap as hypnosis and subconscious reprogramming, right? So like I talked a lot about how talk therapy doesn't really work, and this is why it doesn't work. Meditation doesn't really work. This is why it doesn't work. What you're really missing is subconscious programming. And I explain the science behind where your attachment style lives in your subconscious mind, how it's formed. It's formed when you're between the ages of 0 to 7, for the most part. That's when you're in a very subconscious state of mind. So I talked about that, and that gave people an understanding of why my methodology worked. Now, I had a post that was the 7 anxious attacher blocks, and that particular post is the one that really, I think, moved the needle for me because it contained all three of those things. It really did position me as an authority. It did some gap positioning, and it was very emotionally resonant. And so I think that's like where all of the clients came from that signed with me that month. And that's what allowed me to hit that 5K month, was signing a bunch of new clients. And that post itself, it got like 5,000 views. It wasn't like it was a viral post by any means, but it had those ingredients that make for an activating post. And it got people that I think maybe were borderline, have been watching me for a while, to actually say, sign me up. I'm ready to pay in full. Let's do this. So yeah, that particular post, which I also had sent in an email as well, I booked 5 clients at that $899 price point. And there was also some people that booked one-off sessions. I was still offering that at the time from that post. I had the client that I was already with, she re-upped and actually bought a 3-session package once that post came out. So it even like gave my client that I was already working with like more trust in me as an authority. And so with all of that, that ended up being my 5K sales month. So those are the ingredients: a business idea with a competitive edge, a brand from my essence, speaking to my customer archetypes in a way that made them feel seen, exposing my truth through storytelling, and creating activating content that actually got people to buy. So those 5 ingredients together is what helped me to get to that 5K point. And I know that was a lot. And so if you're looking to really dive into this more deeply, I have a 5-day email series that walks you through these exact steps. 5 days to channel your depth into your next 5K. And I will have the link right below here if you want to sign up, and you'll get 1 email per day that will walk you through these steps. And it basically reiterates what I just shared with you, but also gives you a particular exercise that you can go through yourself in order to master these 5 things. And yeah, you're probably not going to hit 5K in 5 days, but truly, when you really master these pieces, and you have an audience, right, that is a decent size. I have 77 people in my Instagram audience right now. And so I'm probably not going to hit a 5K month with just 77 people. But once you get to it, like I said, like 500 or so, you absolutely can get to a 5K month with that. So that is all that I have for you today. And if you're looking for one-on-one support, I also have a mentorship, Deep Marketing. If you are interested, you can take a look and submit an application, and I will get back to you with next steps. Okay. Love you guys, and thank you for being here.